Thank you for having me today. I am Kristina Flathers, Head of Library Services for Nemours Children's Health. And today we're just going to do a quick overview on plagiarism, pitfalls, and best practices. So plagiarism and copyright do kind of overlap each other. They are separate entities where copyright is a legal protection of published media. That can be a journal article, a book chapter, a song, a movie. All of these are covered under copyright law. So it is kind of interesting to look at the US copyright.gov website because you can go through and sort through all different cases. Plagiarism is considered to be more of an ethical issue where you're taking credit for the work of another author, creator, researcher, however that kind of falls. But they do overlap, and within the legal world, they really do focus on copyright. So we're gonna start there, and we're gonna start to talk about fair use. Because fair use is thrown around a lot in the education world. A lot of the people on this meeting are faculty. Ultimately, your faculty role will determine where you land in fair use, but I just kind of want to put it out there as a concept. Legal precedent has shown fair use is definitely viewed on a case-by-case basis, and the intent of the person that's being accused of violating copyright law, violating somebody else's rights to ownership, is the main focus when we look at the court cases. It's all about the intent of the users, and I have a couple of little anecdotes about that. But these are the four factors that they discuss in case law: the purpose and the character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and substantiability of the portion used, which is where academia usually kind of gets tripped up, and then the effect upon the potential market of the copyrighted work. I took this information from Cornell University. If you just Google Cornell and fair use or Cornell and copyright, they have a ton of information. They actually have a really nice checklist if you ever wanted to see, is this something I need to get permissions for? They have a very simple checklist to go through. It's very nice when a university has a large university presence with a fantastic law school, with a fantastic medical school. They kind of address all of the issues we have to address here. So here's a couple of case studies, and I tried to find ones that were very specific to what happens in academia. The first one is probably one of the more well-known, Cambridge University Press, and it's actually against Georgia State University. And what they did was they allowed for a vast amount of copyrighted materials. So in this instance, it was a lot of journal articles and book chapters, and they just put them on the internet for students to download. There was no monitoring. There was no guardrails about this is for a specific class. This is up for, this part of the academic calendar. Things were just kind of put on the internet and left, and people could access it. They were looked at on a case-by-case basis. When it actually went through multiple levels of court, this one made it up to the federal level. And in this instance, what they decided was some of the professors had no ill intent. They didn't know any better. And other professors did it to try to keep students from having to buy journals and textbooks. So that's where that second and third, or the third and fourth of the four factors came into play, that it was a substantial amount of the work, and they were trying to control the market, trying not to have students pay for materials. The second one is very similar, where they did course packs. That was a big thing when I was in college 100 years ago. You could go to the student store, and there would be these course packs with hundreds of journal articles in them, pieces from book chapters. Kinko's was sued almost into oblivion over this. But this was Princeton University Press versus Michigan Document Services. And that has really kind of changed the marketplace. This is another place where your academic affiliation, if any of you, I don't think any of you teach kind of in that sort of circumstance, but your academic affiliate might have access to a source like Xanadu, where they put the course packs together for you, and they get all of the copyright permissions for you. And then the last one really will tie into more when you are an author. And this is who owns the international rights for copyrighted material. This was based on someone who was traveling back and forth between the US and Thailand and saw that they had the same textbooks in bookstores in Thailand as they were selling in the US. The prices were very different. It was much less expensive to buy them in Thailand. He ended up importing a bunch of textbooks, thousands of textbooks, and selling them for well below US market costs on eBay, of all places. And he did not have the right to do that. He was undercutting the market in the US. I understand where he's coming from with costs as a college student, but it was deemed illegal. But you will need to be aware of that when you turn over your copyright to publishers. So these are the kind of internal requests that we receive around copyright. Journal Club, you are free to distribute internally paper copies from any of the journals we subscribe to, and we subscribe to several thousand journals. And you can use these for any educational and or CME, CE granting activity. I know a couple of the departments at one point would have kind of this little box on one of the admin desks that people could kind of go through and pick up the pack of materials for that week's journal club or that month's journal club. Usually the limit is 25 copies. That's not really kind of an issue with any of our clinical journal clubs. Articles that are ordered through interlibrary loan are not eligible to be shared internally or externally. You will always get a copyright permission statement with those warning you against that. And this is where we would have a conversation about intent, that you are told by the library that you cannot share it. I've had people tell me that they're going to share it anyway, and then I get to forward their email that says that to compliance. So if we tell you you can't share it, you can't share it. I will show you how to get further permissions. And electronic distribution of PDFs is prohibited. You have to share the link. It should not be difficult to share the link. If you ever have a problem with that, just let us know. We now have something called open access set up, so you can access, I think, all of our resources at this point off-site. You just have to have a Nemours username and password, and you can get into anything that we own, and most of your academic affiliates will do the same thing. And I did a little screenshot I pulled an article from Clinical Key to show you. I have gotten this back, that I have shared articles with people and have had it resent to me from not the person I sent it to, and my name is on it. Clinical Key will also, if you're not signed into a Clinical Key account, it'll show Nemours Children's Health or Nemours Children's Hospital, depending on which physical location you're accessing it from. So our name, our institution's name is placed somewhere. There's an electronic signature within those PDFs that can be tracked. We also can help you, and this is one of the other questions that we get, is the copyright, plagiarism for publishing and posters, and then instruments, especially if you're doing a survey. We can usually get you access to the article that discusses the tool or the instrument, but you might have to then reach out to the original owner of the tool to actually get the rights to reuse it. So what happens when you publish? You are going to hand over the copyright permission for that article to be published, but you still own your original research. So that's what happens with a lot of these survey tools and instruments. The person who created it owns the tool. They just have given permission to the journal to share the tool. So plagiarism as an author, kind of what do you need to really worry about at this
Kristina,
stage?
can I stop for just a second? I had a question for you. And
yeah, of course.
I need these slides. You have no idea, because then I can send them to people. Because people don't believe me, the stuff that I tell them. And everybody on the call, I say this at every meeting I'm in, but you have no idea how much we appreciate the library, because they have so much knowledge on what happens after it leaves Nemours. We're really good at getting it in there and getting it ready to be submitted so it's written well. But what happens when it leaves, there's so many things happening out in the world now and in publishing, and they're very up on it and they know the rules. So definitely reach out to them if you have questions. We do it all the time. They're wonderful with questions. I appreciate we all four of us go, God, thank goodness we have them. I have a question you had on there for to put a figure on a poster. A lot of people think it's okay as long as I put the source on there, it's fine. That is the same as educational. But sometimes posters are published or something else. What do you want us to tell people when they say, can I just plop this on here and put the source on there? We always suggest don't do that.
Don't do that. If it's internal, you can do it. So thank you for clarifying that, Michelle. I really appreciate it. So if it's an internal poster, so if you're participating in Research Week in a couple of weeks and it's only going to be displayed at Nemours in Nemours hallways for Research Week, you can more than likely use it, especially if it's something pulled directly from Clinical Key or Up to Date. Our contracts with them allow, and Clinical Key is Elsevier, and there's 1,000 journals in there, and there's, I think, like 900 books in there. So there's a lot in there, and you can search Clinical Key and Up to Date by table, graph, image. So both of them allow for internal usage without additional permissions. If you are publishing in a book, a journal, a poster, that will leave our hallways, that will leave our intranet and possibly be posted on the internet, or a journal, a book definitely is going to be posted elsewhere. But be careful when you're going to conferences, because we've had this happen at conferences, because my department answers to the same department as CME. They've had problems with people putting things up in conferences, and the person who created it is in the audience, and then all hell breaks loose because they
That's
did
the
not
thing.
seek permissions.
And that's the example I give. You don't, especially if you're presenting a poster in a certain field, that person that you pulled from may be walking around, and
Yep.
people still say, no, I just want to use it, whatever. And so
Nope.
they think a poster, because it's not a short shelf life anymore. It can be presented, it can be photographed, it can be published somewhere. So it's not, they see them just as the educational. So thank you for reiterating that, because we
Yeah,
tell
no,
a
thank
lot
you.
of
Thank you for
people.
making sure we covered that.
Yeah, people are just confused. But like I said, now I have slides. I can go in here. This is why. Yeah, we do our best on our end, and we also don't see all posters. So that's why
Right.
this is also helpful to make sure the people who don't use us and we don't catch, they also are aware. So this is helpful. Thank you very much.
And that's where something is going to slide from copyright issue into a plagiarism issue. It's not just I got this from. You have to have permissions for any illustration. So plagiarism as an author, what can be reused and how? So everybody learned how to do a quote in probably an MLA format when you were in school. You can still do quotes. You can still say, this person said this, and I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to give them full credit. You can also do factual rephrasing, because how many different ways I always use appendicitis as my example. How many different ways can you say this child presented in an emergency room, they had pain here, we did this imaging, this was their blood count, all of those things. There's only so many ways to say it. So factual rephrasing. Every applicable reference should be put in your citations. If you read it and you think it might have stuck in your brain, just add it to your reference. I know that with some journals, they limit the number of references, so you will have to be very strategic in what you're citing, but not everybody does that for every article type. And then I do want to talk about plagiarism detecting software, because I'm not the biggest fan of it. I have kids that are school age. I see why the schools use it. Even the schools are getting into trouble with it, because if you are an English teacher that has been teaching Othello, the play Othello for the last 5 years, you're going to ask kind of the same questions about Desdemona and Iago and Othello and how they all relate to each other. And they're going to run it through the school's Authenticate. And because the same teacher has taught it the same way and asked the same questions, it's going to show up that it was stolen, and it probably wasn't. It's just repetitive nature. You see it at the college level too. But what happens when you are doing original research, which a lot of people in this group are, and you are then running your original research through a large language model? Because a large language model is what these things are. It's what artificial intelligence is. So you are basing this large language model on a corpus, and that corpus is built by adding to it. We see some really wacky things happen on the library side, where people are asking research questions to ChatGPT in particular. I haven't really tried the Bing one, but people are asking research questions to ChatGPT, and it's giving back references that don't exist because it's hallucinating. It just kind of makes stuff up because you want an answer. When you feed it your original research, you are adding your original research to the corpus. So you are kind of giving away the store before a journal has a chance to publish it. It then might cite your original research when you go to run it through Authenticate as something that you stole from yourself. That has happened with a few researchers, not that I know of within Nemours, but there's people who have very specific voices when they write, and they write about very specific things. And Authenticate will come up with it's stolen, but turns out they're being accused of stealing it from themselves. So you should not use any Grammarly, ChatGPT, Authenticate, any of those services for your own research. And you really shouldn't use it for peer review. Most peer review, you're not checking it for commas and semicolons and language, unless it's language that's specific to your field of study. So let the editors worry about that piece. Please don't run somebody else's or your own materials through one of the large language models. Also, copyright as an author, you will be signing over copyright. Some will also include international rights. We've had a few instances where we've had authors publish things and then 5 or 10 years later, they will land in a non-English language speaking journal because the original publisher gave it away without telling them. They had signed off on it, didn't realize it. Just kind of be aware that it happens. All of the journals will have statements. Some of the publishers, it's not going to be the same statement throughout. Elsevier notoriously has a mix of society journals and then journals they just kind of own. Society journals will kind of have different language. They're doing their own thing. They're really just using the publisher as their version of Amazon. They're just kind of pushing out the product for them, but they have their own rules. But I just wanted to give you an example of a statement. Elsevier is a big giant publisher. I think they're currently the largest publisher in the world. It kind of goes back and forth between them and Springer. But this is what they say to you. And they've added this piece about if the author chooses to own the copyright, they have to have it as open access, because having it open access then allows them to create something called a Creative Commons license, which we'll look at in a second. So think about that. If there is something that you are publishing that you do not want to hand those rights over, that's a conversation for you to have with your leadership in your department or with your center or with your lab. Just kind of keep that in mind. That is an option. And think about maybe adding some of this, for those of you who are doing grants, adding some of this language into your grant structure, maybe keeping a little bit of money aside when you're writing out how much things are going to cost. It might be worth kind of considering this. Most of the journals, the average open access fee right now is around $3,000 plus or minus. So just kind of keep that in mind if you think you might want to hold on to the rights for something. So this is an open access and Creative Commons license. This is where you maintain the copyright and you are allowing other people to do things with it based on certain permissions. You can also Google this one, Creative Commons will show up. There's 6 different types of licenses. Some are incredibly permissive and you're just like, yeah, people can do whatever they want with it. And others are much more strict. This is the one that I prefer for here. If you are doing something that's original research, every version of the license credit is given to the creator, and that's what that little person icon is. Only non-commercial uses of the work are permitted. So that means if you are working on something that a pharmaceutical company or device company might want to use, they have to ask you if they want to take out your graph. So if you have done something and you have this really great informative table or graph, if they want to reuse it in their own work, in their own presentations, they have to come to you and explicitly ask for permissions. This one also does not allow people to make any adaptations of your work. So if that same device company or pharma company wants to take your work and alter your graph, this is a hard no. They can ask you and you can decide on a case-by-case basis. So like I said, there's actually one that's even stricter that I think allows like no use. But this is the one that I think is the best for people doing research. If you're writing a review article that ends up as open access, you know, something a little bit more broad, you can look at the different options. But if you are doing original research and it's going to be open access and you have the opportunity to do a Creative Commons license, don't be that nice. Protect your work. The other thing that I'm going to talk to you about is a copyright clearance center. So this is what happens when you need permissions to use that table or that image in your poster presentation, in a journal article that you're writing, in a book chapter that you're writing. It's not complicated, it's tedious, and you have to have a lot of information before you do it. So just about every journal will have some version of this. I pulled one from Clinical Key because I was in Clinical Key. I actually, in order to get to this version of it, you have to go to the Science Direct. You can't be within our kind of database shell. You have to go to the original journal, which is this journal sitting on the Science Direct site. But down here on the right, I highlighted the Get Rights and Content section, because what you're going to do is you're going to click that. And then it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. I opened all of the options that you can scroll through. So when I was talking about Journal Club and I said, oh, you're going to need permissions to use something we don't own for Journal Club, this is where you would do it. You would want to use this to make photocopies. Some of them are going to charge you a nominal fee. Some of them are going to charge you a crazy fee. We also have had requests for reprints or e-prints. from some of the conferences, and those costs were insane. It's usually like $50 per reprint, and the last one that we were requested for was like a 1,200 person conference, so it was a hard pass. Um, all you do is you pick what your use is for, and then I just kind of filled this out so you could see what it looked like. So I said I was reusing it in a journal. Pick whatever is the closest to Nemours. If there's the option to put Academic Educational Institute, go ahead and put that. A lot of times it'll just be not for profit, and then we kind of get really weird questions back. But I always put Academic Educational Institute if it's an option. Hospital, of course, if it's an option, but it very rarely is. I chose Springer. This one happened to give me a list of publishers. Not everybody will do that. A lot of times you have to type it in. If I had chosen I was going to do this in a book chapter, they would want to know different things. If I had said CME materials, so it was going to be reused in a conference, it would be different. A poster, it would be different. Journal's the one we get asked the most. It wants to know what I'm using, so I chose the figures, tables, and illustrations. It wants to know how many you're using. A lot of times it will want to know exactly which figures you're using, and it'll want figure 1A and what it's a picture of. Usually it's going to be print and electronic. Even Springer, which they don't print out anything anymore, but they give us a hard time if we don't ask for permissions for both. I don't think I've ever had anybody who was the original author ask, and I've never had to have a translation version. And then you just click the quick price, and sometimes it gives you a price immediately, and sometimes it takes 3 weeks. It just depends on how quickly it works. A lot of times, if you're going from one journal to another, but it's the same publisher, it's a flat zero. Sometimes they want a little bit more information, but it's pretty simple. And it'll answer you. We'll help you do this for you. I don't mind filling out some paperwork for you. I just will need to be able to answer these questions. If you are not the corresponding author, you might need to get some of this information from the corresponding author. If it is a chapter in a book, you might need to get some of this information from your editor for your book. With the books, the things that can be tricky is what is their expected print run? And the publishers always have an answer for that because they know if they package it, how many packages they sell, or if they sell it a la carte, they have a guess of how many they're going to sell. And then lastly, we're just going to talk about your academic partners because I brought that up a few times. They will have incredibly specific guidelines on the use of class materials should you need them. They use the commercial services such as Xanadu for things like course packs. They also will have a very tight legal affairs department, especially in terms of intellectual property. I know Nemours takes on intellectual property fights on your behalf as well. And your academic partner might be able to provide some financial support if you do need to seek permissions that they have to be paid for. We are not in a position that we can provide financial support when you need money to pay for permissions, but we'll actually provide the service of getting the copyright for you to make sure everything happens the way it's supposed to happen, and whether or not you actually need it, we'll talk you through those pieces as well. So that was not as quick as I thought it would be, but does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
I know again, I'm going to jump in again, and this is a good thing too. If you have a figure that you think you want to borrow from somewhere, the library is really good at going, you know what, I can find this for you that you're allowed to use that we don't need to request permission for. So that's the other thing you guys are good for. You save them because you know another way to get something that shows the same thing that and so that's another thing. Turn to them when no, here, this shows you the same thing, and you can use it, and it's much simpler, shortening the time, because as she mentioned about the permissions can take a while and can be very expensive sometimes. It's ridiculously. They're also good at finding another option for you and able to do it that way. So that's the other thing you guys are good at.